Listen, we often talk about reproductive justice. By the way, your hair is amazing right now. It's
Thank you.
glorious. Just shout out to you in the hair situation. But we often talk about reproductive justice when you are on these airways. And yet, we're going to shift a little bit today to talk. Actually, I don't even know if it's a shift when I think about it, because your ability to have bodily autonomy is also, I think, contemplated by the provinces of the First Amendment. But you and the amazing Jessica Mason Pico had a really fascinating conversation about the rewriting of the First Amendment, which is happening in real time. If you could, for the audience, explain to us the value of having a First Amendment. Like, why do we have it? Why do we need it? And then talk to us a bit about the threats that that amendment is facing and what those implications mean for those of us who actually plan on still living in this country because we ain't got nowhere else to go.
Well, I mean, the First Amendment is critical, right? It enables people to criticize their government. It enables people to speak their truth to the extent that they're not inciting violence without
Mm,
threat of, reprobation from the government. A lot of times people really misunderstand what free speech is. They think it's the right to say whatever they want without
right,
consequences. And we hear a
right.
lot about how private companies like Twitter and Substack, these companies that are not governments and that I believe have a responsibility to tamp down on hate speech and to moderate that sort of language off of their platforms. They rely
Mm,
on the First Amendment in order to shirk accountability for allowing hate speech to profit on their platforms. So
right.
the First Amendment is a key sort of first offense between an American citizen and their right to say what they want to say and the
Mm,
government's ability to punish them for saying what they want to say. Now, what's
huh,
interesting when it comes to the First Amendment is that it seems to only apply to certain people and not to others, right? There are certain
right.
people whose speech is elevated as more important than the speech of other people. And
Mm,
so that's what we're seeing when we talk about all of these book bans, right? These rampant book bans that are being enacted across the country,
right.
or just where school boards are gathering together and saying we don't want our kids to learn about XYZ. And XYZ can be anything from the fact that LGBTQ people exist to
Mm-hmm.
the fact that slavery happened and was bad. All of
It's that
these.
last part that really gets them, Imani. Not
Right,
even
right.
that it was happened, but
Like, it
it's
was
bad. What do you
free.
mean?
It was free room and board. I mean, it wasn't free, but you had a place to
Jesus.
live and you had some like food. I mean, the way that people will tie themselves into knots in order to
Yeah.
justify black people were happy under slavery. Yeah, okay.
Mm,
And so we're seeing that this particular case that I know you want to talk about, this case called Mahmood v. Taylor, it's the Don't Say Gay in School case. And it's a
right.
case out of Montgomery County, Maryland. Like Silver Spring, Bethesda, Chevy Chase, that area. I grew up in that area, so I know all those places.
Mm,
But in Montgomery County, the school board said, you know what, we are going to include these 9 LGBTQ inclusive books into the library. They were just going to
mm,
put these books on the shelves and kids would be allowed to read them if they wanted to. They could pull it off the shelf for like a personal reading, or they could recommend it to a friend, or they could choose it for a read aloud. No one was being forced to read these books. No one was being forced to become indoctrinated into the LGBTQ big gay agenda, which is seemingly what Christian evangelicals think is happening in schools, right? Everyone's,
mm.
they've got kitty litter boxes so kids can pretend to be cats in school. And, your gay, blue haired, lip ringed teacher is transing your child during story hour in kindergarten. I mean, these are the sorts of more extreme arguments that people make. In Mahmood, what I think is interesting is there was a group of parents. Some of them were Muslim, some of them were Jewish, and some of them were Christian. So I think it's interesting that they led with Mahmood as the named
Mm,
plaintiff, right? Because it's sort
right.
of like it's not just the Christians who don't want to learn about the gays; it's these other groups too, right?
Right.
And so what happened in that case is that Montgomery County at first said, you know what, parents, if you want to opt out your kids from even being exposed to these books, then we're going to go ahead and allow that. And it turned out to be not workable. So later on, Montgomery County School Board said, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. Like these books are
Wait,
on the
when you
shelves.
say it wasn't workable, you mean like when you tell some kid not to read something, they're probably gonna want to read it, kind of not workable, or if the book's in the library and your mama don't want you to read it, but you was like, I'm gonna read it because my mama don't want me to. Can't nobody stop you? Like when you say unworkable, what do you mean by that?
Meaning trying to tailor school curriculum to each individual person's religious sensibilities. Not to mention
Mm,
what happens when you have a child with divorced parents and each of the parents has a different idea about what
wow,
is acceptable for their child to be reading in school. And,
wow.
part of the real issue with this case is that the right wing took some of these books and then just went bananas, right? There's a book called Pride Puppy. And in this book, the author, her name is Robin Stevenson, I believe. The author basically shows what it's like if a little kid goes to a pride parade. And it's like an alphabet book where you pick things out of the pictures that correspond to that alphabet. So like A is for apple, B is for, whatever, banana. But in this book, it was things that they were seeing at a pride parade. And so the right wing took specifically certain words like leather and underwear
Oh
and
my
made it seem
gosh.
like this book was acting as some sort of BDSM manual for kindergartners. But when you look
Here's
at
how
the
you
book,
bend.
like the word
Jesus.
underwear is literally just like a person wearing underwear under their pants, right? Or the leather, it's not like a leather strap or some sort of leather bondage. It's literally a person wearing a leather jacket, right? So they
Mm,
whipped up Christian evangelicals on Fox News against these books to the point where during oral arguments in this case, where the court is trying to decide whether or not Montgomery County is required to provide opt outs to religious people who oppose their children being exposed to these books, not even being indoctrinated, not
mm,
even being coerced into believing that homosexuality is a good thing, right? Parents are still able to at home teach their kids whatever they want. But what
right.
the school district kept saying during these oral arguments is that we live in a pluralistic society, and part of our job as educators is to make sure that kids are prepared for the world, for the different
Right.
types of people that they're going to meet in the world. And more than that, at such a young age, you want to teach respect and tolerance for other people. You don't
Mm,
have to become gay yourself, right? Like
right.
there were honestly, one of the questions John Roberts asked made it seem like he thought that teachers were saying in school, you got to be gay. We're going to read these gay books and then we're going to make you gay. That's not even the case. There was no evidence in this case that the teachers were even teaching these books, which was
Right.
another huge problem. Like there was just no record. But that's sort of what the Supreme Court does, right? It takes these sort of cultural issue cases that are devoid of any record that would even require them to have taken the case in the first place. And they
Mm,
decide that they are going to upend precedent because that's what they want to do, right? Like
wow.
my podcast co host Jess keeps saying to me, when we get these cases that seem absurd and that seem like they should be a clear loss under outstanding precedent, there's a reason the Supreme Court is taking these cases, right? And it's not to just reaffirm that, yeah, kids should be learning that LGBTQ people exist. It's to change the law in some way to the detriment of LGBTQ families or other marginalized people.
Mm. And that effort to remove the protections of the law from the LGBTQ community or whatever insert marginalized community, whichever one is your choice, while it focuses and uses these examples that are easily whip upable on a Fox News type of show, the reality is the implications of these rulings are not limited to the communities that the court is using to highlight or to drive public opinion either for or against a particular issue. Aren't all of us going to be impacted by a shrinking of the protections of the First Amendment, even if you're not a part of the gay community, like even if you're not a part of the Black community? Won't this redound to the harm of all of us regardless of our community membership?
I mean, not all of us, right? Not white
Oh.
evangelicals. It's going to redound to the
Mm.
harm of black and brown people, of trans people, of queer people.
Mm.
But if you're a cisgender, heterosexual white male, you're good, pretty much. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. And so, you know, it's it's really disturbing watching. One thing that really struck me about the oral arguments in the case is just how far justices are willing to go in order to make it seem like their position is reasonable, right? Neil Gorsuch, talking about Pride Puppy in oral arguments, said something to the effect of, well, gosh, I read this book and it's about a sex worker who's into leather bondage. My guy, you did not
Wow.
read Pride Puppy if you came away from Pride Puppy thinking it's about a sex worker who is into leather bondage. There's another book called
Mm.
Uncle Bobby's Wedding, where it's about a little girl who's a little bit sad that her uncle is getting married and she feels disconnected from her uncle's fiance. And then at the end of the book, the uncle's fiance and the little girl become friends. And then she's not sad anymore that her Uncle Bobby is getting married. The fact that her Uncle Bobby is getting married to a man isn't really the nut of the book. It's about
Mm.
dealing with your feelings when you feel like someone close to your life may not have enough attention to spend on you as they otherwise would have. The fact that he was marrying a man wasn't a big deal. So why did Sam Alito sit in oral arguments talking
Jesus.
about how Uncle Bobby's Wedding was about a girl who was confused about the fact that her uncle was marrying a man and had problems with it, but then the book indoctrinates people to believe that this is the one and only true good way to live a
Wow.
life. Right? So they're just making shit up when they and
Mm.
it's not the first time they've done it, right? Neil Gorsuch specifically in a case called Kennedy versus Bremerton a few years ago, it was the let the coach pray case, right?
Yep.
This coach was having very public prayer sessions before football games with both teams in the middle of a field. They're holding their helmets up and they're praying, praising Jesus. And then Neil Gorsuch categorized that very public prayer session as just a private session that the man was having in his locker room with a few couple guys. Right? To the point where Sonia Sotomayor had to add a picture of what it looked like when they were praying on the field so that future justices could understand just how far afield this court has gone when it comes to entangling religion and education or entangling religion and any wide manner of categories, right? We're in a period of
Mm.
time where religion is starting to trump a lot of other rights, and it's scary, right? We heard oral
Yeah.
arguments last week in that Oklahoma public religious charter school case. The court
Mm.
is about to allow, or force rather, Oklahoma to spend public funds on a public religious school. We don't do that
Wow.
here, right? But the
Wow.
fact that the court took the case and the tenor of the oral arguments demonstrate that those First Amendment freedoms, right? The First Amendment includes not just freedom of speech, but also freedom of religion. Those First Amendment freedoms are really also only reserved for Christian evangelicals. So essentially, this entire society is being reordered right now to erase Black people, to erase brown people, erase Native people, erase women in favor of a white centric, cisgender, heterosexual outlook, right? And it's frightening how quickly this is happening.